So that's fantastic. So that's a bit of housekeeping at the start. And obviously, as per usual, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we want to hear your comments, your tasting notes throughout, regardless of any kind of prize giveaway. And you'll be getting 15% off all of these SKUs at the end of the tasting. We'll be giving you a discount code for that. So it's worth sticking around. And if not, you'll get it in the email anyway in Zoom tomorrow. So spoiler. So brilliant. Well, Charlotte, do you want to tell everyone who you are and maybe give us an idea of what order we're going to be going in tonight?
Yes, good shout indeed. Hello, everybody. So lovely to be back. Especially, I love chatting with you, Luke, about whiskey, actually. It's a lot of fun. My name is Charlotte. I work for Diageo, which is a very large spirits company, and I'm a malts ambassador for them. I get to talk about 29 different malt distilleries every day, and I've got to tell you, this team, it ain't a bad life. We're talking about Lagavulin today. Obviously, you must know because you've bought these lovely packs. And I would recommend as a lineup, we start with the 8-year-old. Then we'll be going on to the 16, then Distiller's Edition, and then finally ending up on the special release 2022. I don't know if anybody's lined them up already and thought which order they would like to go in themselves, but this is my way. I think this would be the best way that I'd like to explore it anyway.
Marvelous. Well, I'll get my 8-year-old poured there.
I've already pre-poured a few of them. Didn't quite have enough glasses for the last one. I know, it's terrible. Whiskey household with not enough glasses.
Yeah, that's crazy.
They're under all the bottles upstairs. That's why. Gone.
No, I mean, this is this 8-year-old. This is because obviously Lagavulin's quite famous for it. The fact when I first was getting into whiskey that the entry level was 16 years, and that was kind of like a unique point of difference. So I remember kind of being intrigued when this came out because this was an anniversary bottling or something, wasn't it, originally?
It is. Originally started off as just something, just going to pop on out, see what happens, and then just became a staple. And usually with my tastings, I go for the key core that everybody knows, which in this case would be the 16-year-old. But I kind of, because of the notes, the flavor difference that I find between the two, I think it's really nice to start with the 8, something a bit younger and brighter. I would say to everybody at home, if you do have enough glasses, do pour them out ahead, give them time to open up. But also just because I really like comparing between the two, most especially between our first two, the 8 and the 16, because they're just such stark difference. I mean, I don't know if you're doing the same, Luke, but
I definitely.
No,
I always like just for anyone who's joining who doesn't normally do this with us. I like to not only get them all poured in advance, as you say, Charlotte, but also keep a bit as well when we move on to the next one. So when we start moving on to the whiskies, don't feel pressured to neck back what's left in the glass. If you have the glassware, do keep some for comparing and contrasting.
See, sometimes it's too tempting for me, so I'll leave stuff in the bottle just in case I do want to. Oh God, it's all gone like that. It's not too easy, right?
Yeah, exactly. If the person chatting away like yourself who's joining us on these tastings is either really good, and therefore you forget what you're doing and you subconsciously neck it, or they're incredibly boring and you drink it just to kind of get through the night. It can end up going. So it is good to keep some in the bottle, maybe not just the glass.
Well, if there are empty glasses, I don't want to know which way it is. I feel like it would be the latter. So no reviews, but I would love to be. I hope I give you some stories which maybe you haven't heard about Lagavulin beforehand, or at least find interesting and refreshing to hear again. I know we had a good chat about what sort of fun stories we like hearing about Lagavulin.
Indeed. I'm trying to find Pete, who's sat next to Andrew Smith there in the chat, but I can't find. There's too many people on screen. I can't find you, Pete. Sorry. So anyway, do you want to tell us about this 8-year-old, Charlotte, or Lagavulin? Where do you want to start?
Oh, you know what? I mean, like if we haven't already had a sip, I mean, we've had a little chat beforehand. I've been sipping away at this boy. Please do feel free to crack on in and have a little taste. I think I'm going to start by saying what I really enjoy about it. I mean, as you've mentioned before, Luke, it was brought out as this little addition to the family, just on a random occurrence to kind of show what young Lagavulin tastes like. When I talk about Talisker, we always say that Talisker at 8 years old was always supposed to be the best way of drinking Talisker. And I think people coming into Lagavulin where they've traditionally had the 16-year-old, it's a bit of a shock. It's a bit of a surprise. But I kind of like that about it. For me, this is, well, for me, it's young. You can tell it's younger, but it's real bright because of that. The thing of when I opened up the bottle, all of the peat just filled the room. That's one of my favorite things about cracking into a bottle of peated whiskey is when it just becomes apparent. It just like mists over yourself. But I was going to say, should I get into tasting notes or shall I let people crack away? I feel like since this is the first one, maybe I'll do a little bit of a lead.
Yeah, get us warmed up, like, you know, prime the pump.
100%. For me, this is, I mean, of course, we're talking about peated whiskey. You know, Dr. Jim Beveridge, our former master distiller,
he famously invented the beverage.
You know what? That's why they gave it the name. It's true. Such a good name for his role. He would always start off with a Lagavulin 16 when doing any sort of tasting. So needless whether there was a Glenkinchie in there, a Clynelish in there, he would always start with a Lagavulin 16 with the idea in mind. If you're not paying attention, then if you can't get all of the delicious notes out of a Lagavulin 16 at the beginning, you're not going to really be able to pick up anything else. So I think it's like that you put your sharp eye in first, and that's what I kind of love. We're going big and bold with peat, just straight off the bat. This for me is real bright and zesty and like almost like sappy woods. The type of peat is so rich. It's I was thinking about it before we started the Zoom, and how do I describe this? And all the time I think that it's a bit more, it's a bit peppery, almost like that's Talisker pepper, but it gives you that tingle. It gives you a bit more of a chili bite to it. But it's really very green. I don't know if you know what I mean by green. If anybody's ever drunk mezcal before, it's along that kind of herby green side for me.
Oh, totally. I would never have thought that, but I can definitely see it. It's a lot. I mean, it's been a while since I've had the 16, so maybe I'll change my mind when we come to this. But it's a lot kind of fruitier as well and lighter than you'd expect. Terry has said in the chat, Lagavulin is my favorite whiskey, but I don't find this 8-year-old peaty / smoky compared to the 16-year-old. Why do you think that is, Charlotte? That the older one might have a bit more of a impact for Terry there?
You know what? That's a really good question, because I mean, on my side, I always find that younger peated whiskies are so much full of peat. They're almost they need to be harnessed almost. It could be that that's a really good point, actually. It could be that the age is just adding volumes to it. I mean, it's literally double the age. It's had double the time to rest and roll over and, I guess, refine a little bit. I don't know. I was going to say, if you've done a comparison right now, it's a really nice idea to have a little sip ahead. I know we're jumping ahead to the next one. But for me, I tend to find this a bit more sea salty, a bit, I hate to say it, rough around the edges, but in like the best sort of way. It's like the 16-year-old's younger, more rebellious brother or sister, let's say.
No, I can definitely see that. It is quite. There was someone said in the chat. James said more like, I'm going to butcher this. Sichuan peppers, peppercorn.
Szechuan pepper.
Szechuan
yeah,
pepper.
100%. No, I totally get it.
I'm not very cultured.
No, at all. I'm going to put the chat up now as well. Szechuan pepper. Yeah. So Szechuans are like slightly floral, but so tingly on the tongue. And I love that. And I totally get that. When we're drinking whiskey, it's not just about what am I smelling, what flavors am I getting. It's the experience on the mouth as well, and it gives you that little bit of a real fun tingle going on as well. It's like a full mouth experience. That was a weird thing to say, but full mouth experience. Let's go with that. I think somebody asked about the cask mix, and this is all ex-bourbon. And when I mean ex-bourbon, I'm talking refill. Generally speaking, and I mean this across the board with all of Diageo distilleries, unless we're explicitly saying so, it'll be second, third, fourth refill. Which level of refill, I wouldn't know. They won't tell me. But all of our first fill ex-bourbon barrels will go to Cameron Bridge essentially for our grain.
Billy said they're just about linking to the W Club. So for anybody who might have missed it at the start, so we're going to give away two different bottles of what full 70 bottles of what we're tasting tonight to people at random based on your picture. Well, maybe not at random actually. Sorry, I didn't say random, but based on your tasting setup and a bit of randomness as well in there, based on your images of your tasting setup at home, as Billy's just posted in the chat there, but posting them on social media and tagging us in them. So the for all the social media channels, we're at My W Club, MYWCLUB, on that's on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we'll pick from across the range. So if you tag the picture up there, Billy, and anyone who missed out at the start, and that's where we'll be picking the winners from. We've also got Roger Nurses, more of a cult than a racehorse. Both winners, but one will win easily. Mezcal notes with a hint of lime, citrus, very Mexican feel to this one. Love the mezcal, chili pepper and spice. What was behind the decision here, Charlotte, for this to go from just an anniversary bottling to something that's still available here? What are we, 6 years later now?
I know, it's crazy when you think about it. I think it's the literal differences between the two. I mean, I think everybody. So for those of you that don't know, when Lagavulin was brought out as a classic malt back in 1990, 1991, part of our 6 classic malts, and even then people were shocked. Like, why would you put something so darn peaty out? Nobody is really going to enjoy this. Only like the real hardcore fans are going to. And I think it was a little bit the same with the 8-year-old. Why would we want this when everybody loves that 16-year-old? It's like a classic in everybody's mind. It's rich, it's peated. I think it was just from the reaction that it got, that it was a point of difference, and it wasn't a Chalila point of difference. It was same distillery. It's really nice to see something which is more of a staple from this distillery and giving you like another side, like another facet of what it can offer, really at a different age statement. And honestly, also possibly because you can get it out quicker. It's an 8-year-old. We can produce it and we can get it out without putting another 8 years in storage.
There's the cynical economic side of things. James has said, did you say where the ex-bourbon barrels are from? And he mentioned that this follows on from the Elements of Islay chat last week. There was a lot of chat in that about kind of cask provenance and how it influences that. Now I know they're obviously much smaller releases, so it's kind of a different story on the scale like Lagavulin are operating on. But have you any insight into the kind of where those barrels are sourced from?
Everything that I get told from the blenders is, even from the blenders, is like little breadcrumbs of information that I hunt down on. I honestly, I would love to be getting more information about them. Unfortunately, not with the provenance. I would say because of how large we are, it's going to be from everywhere. I think it's going to be the more the merrier when it comes to what barrels we need. To give you this idea of scale, when it comes to all of the distilleries, I think well, it's something I've said for a while now, but there are 4 barrels of whiskey for everybody in Scotland, and we look over just over 2 of those per person. So I think we get through a lot of barrels, let's say. When it comes to the provenance of certain bottlings, that's another story. And I mean it in the way that, for example, our Talisker Distillers Edition is in an Amoroso cask. We don't ever mention where these come from, which bodegas they come from, but there is only one bodega that creates an Amoroso. So it's kind of putting the pieces together without actually telling you. When it comes to Lagavulin, I am afraid not. It would be for, I'm sure, wherever they can get it. And I would love to add to that provenance chat and be able to trace the flavoured chat. But I don't think we can on this example, I'm afraid.
No, well, I mean, yeah, at least you've given us some sort of a politician's answer there. But thanks for the question, James.
It really is honestly a very good question. I ask and I ask, especially when we do our special releases of being like, oh, this is a sort of, we're using a red Moscato, and I'm like, brilliant, where's it from? Anyway, we try.
No, I know, I'm being a bit facetious. I wasn't meant to have a go. I totally understand that as I mentioned, those Elements of Islay, it's small batch kind of craft blended whiskies. It's a different kind of cup of tea to the Lagavulin, and
100%.
to the scale that Diageo as a whole operate on, as you know. Belindra said, I would say that the 16-year-old is the mother cheetah and the 8-year-old is the adolescent cub, which I think is a clever point. And Jacqueline has posted a great picture of her on Lagavulin at the distillery. So you were saying there 200 years ago, obviously, or well, 206 years ago now, the
Yes.
distillery kicked off. But you mentioned there the classic malts release in the early 90s. What before then? What was kind of the Lagavulin's presence on the whiskey market?
I believe it was I say very tame. When we talk about Lagavulin, we talk about it as being this beast, but also something which is really plays a massive part in blends. We make the joke that we're not a whiskey company, we're a blending company because of Johnny Walker. And I think that comes part and parcel with it. It's not on show an exceptional amount, but is that beautiful spicy amount to be added in to a blend. I mean, now it's incredibly not the case. We run Lagavulin exceptionally hard. We need to because it's so popular. Like I said, more popular than anybody could imagine for being for popping out a 16-year-old, which I thoroughly enjoy to see. And now we just use Calila for that extra big peat in our blends instead. I love the history of Lagavulin, and I really want to click on that picture, but I'm worried that it's going to upset my whole display. But I love hearing of people's experiences on Islay, on Lagavulin, the beautiful island that it is. And actually, I'm so sorry. I hope you don't mind me asking. I know we were about to talk at some point about your lovely experience and your lovely meeting with Pinky. And I know this is about me chatting, but I would love to hear your lovely experience on Islay.
Yeah, I mean, we could. I definitely come on to. I mean, I'd love to hear of anyone's experiences in Ireland. There's a couple of quick comments in there I'd like to get to first because
Yeah, of course.
Daniel said the Ron Swanson effect. So the part that's
Really good.
shout.
Yep.
I mean, there's a fella I know at Pernod Ricard, actually. Sorry for dropping a competitor, who reckons a huge amount of Jameson's success comes from the fact that Rihanna was a big fan, or is a big fan of it, and drank it a lot on stage in the early 2000s. So it'd be interesting to quantify how many people drink Jameson because Rihanna did, and how many people drink Lagavulin because Ron Swanson did. We've also got, so Stuart says, soft meat decorating. Thank you. Can we do this all again tomorrow too? So you're welcome there, Stuart. Emma Watson, of Harry Potter fame, is that the at an evening tasting at the distillery, the 8-year-old was mixed with Coke. Actually, really nice. Was that actually at the distillery, Emma?
I very much recommend that pairing.
Yeah.
Recently partnered with a lovely whiskey bar in London, and we did the 16-year-old with Coke on tap. Very smoky cokey, if you will.
Oh, very good.
Not me who coined the phrase. It was the fabulous Colin Dunn, but it remains.
Smoky cokey sounds more like a brand of eyeliner or something. But my feelings are that the 8-year-old is gorgeous, lively young whiskey, showing its exuberance of its youth compared to complexity 16-year-old sibling. And Steve says, I found fond memories of visiting the warehouse on my last visit to Islay. So that's brilliant. There's a few more comments there, and I will come on to my bit, but I'm conscious you might maybe come on to the next one. Now, remind me, because I've mixed these up. Are we going Distiller's Edition next or 16-year-old next?
I was going to recommend a 16-year-old since
Perfect.
we're doing like a really nice chat comparison between the 16-year-old and 8-year-old. If you have started on the distillers, we can come around.
No, I haven't. I just confused myself.
No worries. I'm sorry. I'm in a very cold house. I'm trying to warm my glass up. It is very, very chilly in here. Delicious. I feel like people who may be doing this tasting have tried this whiskey beforehand. Just a feeling I get. But for me, it's a very feeling of homecoming coming back to this whiskey. When I talk about my whiskey origin story, this very much was the first whiskey that I had I get it. Like to the point that my husband at the time would refuse to kiss me after drinking Lagavulin 16, um, because I love to drink it, and he just couldn't stand all of the big peaty notes to it. We both started like trying whiskey together, and he was monkey shoulder blends, delicious, nothing wrong with them at all. But I was like big into peat straight away. Love it. I can see somebody else really like had the 16-year-old for their first whiskey. So it's very much a homecoming, and there is definitely a reason why that husband is now an ex-husband.
I didn't want to make really, because I was going to say, which changed? Did he start liking it, or or when you said my husband used to, but
well, here I am drinking Lagavulin 16 without a husband, so I am very happy with this choice. I think more Lagavulin 16 for me. I'm also really impressed when people start with big bold whiskies. I think it's I had a really brilliant chat with somebody in a bar the other day of how it's, you know, it's love or hate, and I'm sure that a good amount of people didn't choose this because, you know, peat is such a divisive flavor. But for me, I think it's that thing when you're getting into whiskey where you know what smoke smells like, and because it's really obvious and in your face, you can go like, ah, brilliant, I know this. I don't have to try and find like apples, or I don't have to find malt, and you can really latch onto it and love it. And that's, I think, what happened with me. God, it's
no,
so good.
it's a smashing whiskey. It is a classic for a reason. There was something on the nose when I first started that I couldn't. I've never got before. I can't quite place. Kirsty says ginger smellitic. I'm sorry, folks. I'm having an off, and I have no idea what that is. Smeltica.
I've not heard of it before, but I appreciate the ginger. It's a bit fiery. Oh, hello.
It is definitely, yeah, fiery, spicy, definitely. Jonathan attended a tasting with Colin a couple of months ago. You mentioned Lagavulin 16 and Coke. Went to the bar. Sounds completely wrong, but it's very good. Not sure if I definitely name the bar in Soho, John. Don't worry, don't feel embarrassed unless you're embarrassed having been there.
Oh God, I hope not. It's a very good bar, very established bar. Milray's in Soho. Would recommend going if you are in London.
I mean, there can't possibly any establishments in Soho that you wouldn't want people knowing you visited. Can there? But
I don't know. There's some shady places in Soho. For me, this is it's like so rich, and I think like I know people were doing the comparison between the two, and I think that's a really good way of doing it. You spot the differences. It really makes them even more apparent when you're doing it between the two. This is a lot more velvety. It's rounder for me in how it feels in the mouth. The peat is more like tarry even.
Mm-hmm. The bar was Milroy's, which is a classic establishment. Yeah. James said 7 years ago, I didn't get whiskey. 8 years ago, sorry, the question jumped away from me. 7 years ago, I didn't get whiskey. 8 years ago, a parent of a child I taught, I'm a primary school teacher, so it wasn't just a random child, bought me a bottle of Laga 16. I bought it at the end as an end of year present, and it was straight in the cupboard. Brilliant. That's, I mean, I've a couple of primary school teachers in my family, and I've seen the gifts they get at end of term, and they're normally nice, but they're normally not that nice. So you must be very good at your job. There's a marked difference between the early White Horse edition and the current edition, and I'm wondering why. Do you have any thoughts on that, Charlotte?
I can imagine it's from streamlining the process, and it's not just streamlining, but I also think it's improving. I had a wonderful day going to see the Coppersmiths, for example, out near Menstrie, near Alloa. I can never pronounce it correctly because I'm terrible with any Scottish wonderful names. And going around and just saying how they've been making for literal decades efforts to improve and streamline, not just so that things are better for making whiskey, but so that they can clean it all better, so stuff doesn't disintegrate better, so that when they go around to actually doing the cleaning of all the copper and replacing, they don't have to spend months like taking apart the distillery and putting it all back together again. I think it would be they told me that we've gone from knocking on the copper, and instead of it going ding, it went dong, and realizing there was an issue, to essentially making everything a little bit more high tech. And it still blows me away that in their like lifetime that it's gone from the ding 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 to the let's scan everything. So I can imagine that smoothing those the knots out would probably have some effect to it as well.
Hmm. Well, that actually reminds me, because there was a question there that I tend to go back to, about chill filtration,
Yeah.
and which Lagavulins, if any or if all, it's used in. So the 8-year-old's non-chill filtered, is it?
Well, it is at 46%, but it doesn't say anything on the bottle. And generally speaking, and I know it's a very big cop-out answer, if it hasn't got on the bottle that was saying, hey, this hasn't been chill filtered, I generally assume it has. And so it's the same with Klein Leash, for example, which is a 46%er. I wouldn't like to tell anybody that anything different, because I'm afraid I don't know anything different. It's the same as my lovely cask answer, I'm afraid. If you ask and they say, just steer the conversation away from something else, unfortunately so. I wouldn't be able to tell you either way. And honestly, I've only ever tried the 8-year-old as it is, and I've only ever tried the 16-year-old like this. I haven't been lucky enough to try any of the lovely old white horse, although I have been bidding on some online. Um, there's always hoping on a little mini that survives through. At the moment, I enjoy the whiskey as it is, so I'm okay with that.
Oh, very good. And James has asked about added colouring. Is there between? I mean, the first one was quite light. Is there colouring in the 16?
Honestly, I would imagine so. It's the same with across the board, and we've mentioned how big Diageo is. Massive company means it needs to make sure everything's okay. Yeah, needs to make sure everything's okay. So I'd imagine they wouldn't ever tell me the figures, but I'm more than certain there would be some colouring in there. Yeah.
Perfect. And in response to James's point about the getting the bottle as a present, Jackie says, "Where do you work? I'm a teacher and I get a call." I think that's the sentiment of a lot of teachers and people in the country at the moment.
Yeah.
James says they're a Scottish family that had moved down south, and there was always a joke about whiskey with them. So I think they got me. It is an end of year joke. It's a good joke. It's very funny. I would have laughed all the ways home. And then I fell in love with it and had to admit this to them a year later. There was a comment there from I think it was Billy that said that until tonight the only Lagavulin I'm tasting was 16-year-old. Until last year I'd mostly avoided peated whiskey. Then at my wedding I decided to take advantage of the venue's whiskey bar. Next day, a bottle of 16-year-old on its way to my house. And there is, I mean, this is another thing you were saying about experiences in Islay. I know there was a comment there about a couple of people mentioned doing the warehouse tasting with Pinky in the chat, which is what I was lucky enough to do myself as well last year. But just as interesting to hear from everyone would be people's first experiences with smoky whiskey. I mean, I can't actually remember the very first time, but I know on a personal level, I have people who've done a lot of whiskey tastings with me who've heard me say this anecdote so many times, but I'm from rural Ireland, and my grandparents, who I'm the eldest of 5, and so I was always at my grandparents' house because my parents were busy raising my younger siblings throughout a lot of time. My grandparents, and they have a stove that heated the whole house. The water and the central heating was done off this one stove, and it was heated. It was powered with turf the whole time, like on 24/7. So my entire childhood was that smell of peat just in my grandparents' clothes, in my clothes when I visited, just in the air. And when I'd leave, go visit family in the UK or somewhere else, and you come back and you'd be driving back into Kerry, and you'd hit it on just driving along the roads. The air would be thick, suddenly would change, and you could smell the peat in the air, which is obviously always there, but you never notice it when you're there, and you're just like, oh, I'm coming home. So it's always been, when I first drink it, it's like straight away I'm like transported to these places, which is like the person who said they tried 16-year-old on their walk in the Highlands on a wet day, and I'm saying when you taste it now, it probably does transport you back there as well. And so peat can be powerful that way, but at the same time, people not like it, I think, is people who can't somewhere in their brain make that link between turf burning in a fire and what's in the glass. And therefore, if you don't have that touched on, whether don't necessarily mean when you're young, but at any point that you're able to compare the two, people's association goes either bonfire or ashtray with where smoke comes from. I think it definitely helps if if you can kind of on some visceral level understand where that peat comes from. When we used to do tastings, I don't know if you've ever done this, Charlotte. We used to have a bit of peated barley, like in its barley stage, and if
Yeah.
people actually taste and smell the peated barley, it's quite chocolatey, and then suddenly it just changes your whole perception of the whiskey compared to if you just go straight nose in into the peated whiskey.
No,
So there you
I,
go.
I totally agree. I think it's something about also seeing what you're eating as well. It's really hard when it's just a liquid in the glass. You don't really know what to expect. No, I love that story. I love hearing about people and smokiness. Was the so when I've been to Northern Ireland before and I've seen all of the them digging turf out of the side of the road. I remember very specifically that the water was like a light yellow color from it. Was your water any different from like peat?
Not in the house, but I presume running off the peat bogs, it probably was. Yeah, but yeah, I imagine so. I mean, it's yeah, that's a good question actually. Not something I thought about, but yeah. Um,
I just remember that. I just because it was the most delicious water I've ever tasted in my life, especially compared to London water. But it had that ever so subtle hint to it, and maybe it's just that the water board hadn't done their job correctly. But a little faint bit of
Maybe whereabouts did you say that was Northern Ireland? Was it?
it was, yeah. I was going to say it's Derry mostly. So I was, and then on the road to Derry, you go through the mountains and you see them always in the rain because it could not rain when I was there, digging turf on the side of the road, just seeing it pop on out. So it was such a lovely experience. But I've not done turf digging myself, although
I have as a kid we had a I mean I was more kind of helping stacking it rather than doing any kind of digging. But the what's interesting, which is off of Roger's comment there in the chat about when they go fishing in Ireland. I'd love to know where you head, Roger. We buy peat to keep us warm and cook in a fire pit. As of last year, now you can't buy peat anymore. It's illegal commercially. So Borden Amona, which is like one of the fuel heating, it was a state-owned company that was set up as like a power energy fuel company, and they were originally all these power plants, electric power plants in Ireland were turf fired because that was the natural resource, and that now they've all transitioned out to kind of greener energies and stuff, which is I can totally understand why. I mean, people get very emotional about it because it's all this kind of things are quite evocative. But I mean, I can understand why they're doing it. But I mean, if you have your own peat bog, you can still cut it and burn it yourself. You just can't buy it and bag loads down in the local shop as you used to be able to. And Roger says he was gutted. Loch Melvin and the Drows, right? I haven't been up there, but yeah, I imagine it's great. John says, Charlotte, interesting your view on peat and the impact on whiskey prices, given the environment challenges and Diageo owning half the market. Do you agree with the view that whiskey prices will shoot up?
Yes, it's something that people have been asking me a lot lately, and quite rightly. You have to ask about the impact. Yeah, I see it. I see it affecting it. I also see that a lot of distilleries, a lot of different brands are talking about alternatives, how we make it a bit more concise, how we cut I say waste in such a way, how we keep it a bit more precise, but also protecting peatland as well. I know there's a lot of work going into it, not only by Diageo but by Edrington are doing a load of work for it as well. I've seen that, and I think it is in everybody's minds. I think that it's a combination of peat, obviously peated whiskey, but also grain will massively affect everything. I had a look into the very boring but very technical side of logistics over COVID and getting glass and cardboard, which was a terrifying fever dream, and that affects it massively as well. And I only see it rolling on and rolling on at the moment, unfortunately.
There was, I mean, Rabis has said they cut peat when they were younger in Scotland. So that's a great. There was another question that popped out of me there that I've just lost for a second, but it was kind of related to that. But just on a side note, I suppose the peat, the level of peat needed to smoke a barrel of whiskey or barley or a run off a still is infinitesimal compared to what you burn heating a house. It's not. it's not,
100%.
it's not an inefficient way of dealing with it. So I do think in terms of value of whiskey, I think barrels and barley and other factors are going to impact prices more than turf. Um, Definitely will. Um, Alexa said, "Is there a particular reason why the 16-year-old has such a distinctive flavor? I absolutely love it. Is there? I know we discussed at the start the kind of different flavors in it, but is there anything before we move on that you think really makes this such a unique dram?"
You know, like I said beforehand, I've been thinking about what I'm going to be talking about, and going back to these drams and really getting reacquainted with them, which is always why I like to take a second and think about what I'm drinking. But when it comes to the actual distinctive flavor, well, a lot of the times I do the comparison really. Um, and I hate that I always have to make a comparison. I wish I could talk about it on a standalone, but just about when I talk about Lagavulin and I do it in person, I just talk about how dumpy and squat the stills are, and about giving it such a big round flavor. I love talking about the nerdy side of worm tubs, for example, but for me, it's like the richness and the full feeling in the mouth is gotten just from uh, how smart they distill it, getting all of those heavier notes through. Um, and I think that's a lot, like that comes down a lot to it. I had a chat with so Jordan Paisley is a new, I say newish distillery manager over at Lagavulin, just to get a bit of flavour for our chat, and talking about how precise and how about the cuts and about how deep they make them to get a bit more big and bold, and getting it almost that harsh edge to it, which I feel is more rounded out when it comes to the 16-year-old. But that's my views anyway. I always go ahead.
No, that's. I mean, James has said got an interesting input there, saying as someone who works on climate change, it's really important that whiskey producers are open about the impacts. While the peat used in the whiskey industry is minimal compared to the other uses, can you elaborate on what projects there are focusing on restoration that you mentioned? It can take hundreds of years to restore 1 inch of peat, so it has to be done really well. Do you have any more insight on those kind of restoration projects? I know I visited Kilcoman when I was on Islay. They spoke a lot about that kind of regeneration of the bog, but I can't remember the the specifics.
It is the same. It's like there is work going ahead, and I can't remember the exact location. I understand that we are talking about peat from Islay at the moment, and we're talking about it being used at the maltings on the island. But I understand there's a lot of work being done on the mainland. Crumbs, and I can't remember the name of the peat bog up in the Highlands that they use specifically. But I understand it's around that area, and I do understand that it is a lot more in depth than I can possibly imagine. I think it's that I can't remember, restriction in such a way that you are very smart with how you use it. Sorry, I'm not phrasing this the best way. People are looking into alternatives, but I'm very wary of that. And then when it comes to the regeneration, and I think it's trying not to uncover any new peat land, which I understand is one of the worst things you can do, is that when you start opening up peat, then just so masses of CO2 is released into the air. But maybe I have got that wrong, and I apologize that I don't have the details right on my head, but I believe it's those 3 factors that we're trying to attack with.
No, interesting.
Go on.
Yeah, no, go on. Yep.
No, I was just saying there's just after talking about the maltings on Islay, so yes, we use Port Ellen maltings. The lovely gentleman in the chat has just asked about the restriction of flow of malted
That was what I was going to about.
Oh, okay, great minds. The other distilleries, my goodness, it's we need to use it for all of ours. It's a lot of the demand on Lagavulin, for one, has increased massively. I remember at the end of last year, I think it was, or maybe like coming into autumn time, we ran out of Lagavulin 16, and a bit of an issue. I mean, I know that we're talking about pretty much decades ahead, but it is that constantly trying to keep up and produce enough. So that is why.
No, makes sense. I mean, I suppose that there's a lot of pressure across the whiskey industry, and I suppose that's probably the same reason why, as you mentioned, there's now an 8-year-old as opposed to just entering in a 16-year-old. And I know there was someone mentioned the kind of the bottle return scheme. I know there was some controversy. I can't
Yeah.
remember. I haven't looked into the exact details, but on my to-do list in the recent weeks about the Scottish government doing something like that, and producers pushing back. So might be a touchy subject.
There,
The bottle return. But I think, in principle, it's a good idea. I know there was a mention of some gin distilleries there that Salcombe Gin allow you to have bottles refilled for a discount. I know they used to anyway when they first opened. Dingle Gin, back where I'm from, used to do the same thing. If you bought back a case of 12 empty bottles, you got a free bottle of gin. So kept kind of some things recycling. So
I was gonna say it's not bad, but also I don't know how quickly I could get through 12. Maybe I could. I think I could do 12 bottles again.
yeah, I don't know how many people personally did it, but I suppose I think a lot of shops and bars, smaller restaurants, people who weren't dealing in huge scale used to do it. I know we tried to do it in a bar I ran, but it didn't always work out because in the summer you go through a lot more than 12 in a short space of time, and
Yeah,
you store
100%.
suddenly case in case of empty glass. It becomes, but we tried our best to do it. So there you go.
We are starting that scheme up. It takes a long time to kind of implement it, but it is something that we are striving towards. Timeline, have no idea when it's actually going to surface. But also we are looking into and creating more for Johnny Walker and Johnny Walker Black, bottles made out of pulp to reduce glass completely. I think that's a really big question to see whether people actually like that, because I mean, I don't have a bottle around me for some reason, but like everybody loves holding a glass bottle. It's that feeling of something worthwhile. There's a Waterford on your shelf, yeah, that one.
I've got loads of bottles. I was trying to find one there is Lagavulin around here somewhere. I could pull up a controversial one there.
We'll allow it. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. But it's that idea of if you're not holding a glass bottle, if you're not hearing the pop of a cork, like there it is. I can see a beautiful Lagavulin held up. Well,
There you go.
where
Steph's got. I've definitely got some here somewhere. But yeah, Steph's will do. That's great.
some people miss out on the fact you're holding something a bit more weight, that feeling of, I hate to say luxury because we're talking about Johnny Walker Black, no shade either way, but of people having an idea against it. Oh, delightful.
Had to do it. Had to do it. Distillery edition.
Yeah.
Or the Distillery Jazz Festival. Sorry.
Yes, yeah.
So there you go. I got jealous of Steph's having all the attention there for a second. So
got all the bottles going on.
and I see Ian Calendar pulling up there as well. I didn't miss that, Ian. Fair play. Yeah. But speaking of which, though, we might come on to the next one. Did we say Distillers Edition was next?
Yes, please. I would like that. I think that would be a really nice idea. Oh, gonna get these confused otherwise. And still a very cold glass. I think somebody asked in the chat a bit ago, what was the best Lagavulin that I would drink again or buy if money was no option? And I hate to say it, I think it is a jazz festival bottling. And I think it was, and I'm just going to try and remember the date because I think it was oh my God, Charlotte, remember. I think it was a 2020, no, it must be 2019. Yeah, of course it was. Bottling. And I genuinely can't tell you why. I cannot tell you why that bottle was so delightful. That year, honestly, the sun must have shone. It must have been the most glorious time to like bring out this bottling. A rainbow fell on the distillery, something like that. It just sang. And I think also, if you don't mind me saying, sometimes that's the beauty of some bottlings. Sometimes they can be a bit of a dud, but on the other side, they can be, wow, that is a glorious addition.
Ina said I had the 2016 Jazz Fest bottling. I've actually had that one as well, and it's a cracking one. We used to have that in a bar I used to work in, and it was very one of those bottles when it's gone, you're very sad to see it go. Ina said that this edition versus the Jazz Festival edition. So the Jazz Festival is bottled for Islay Jazz Festival, and the Distillers edition and is normally only available in the actual distillery, and the Distillers edition is available everywhere.
So many different terms for so many different bottlings, right? Yes. So Jazz Festival only released during the Jazz Festival. It's even more complicated when you get into the Feijar bottlings. only released during that period. Distillers edition, if we're coming onto it, it's essentially released every year. I think we're going to be changing it up a little bit this year, and making it more of an easier rolling release, although I know we have got the release coming up soon of the latest editions. Essentially, we take the classic 6 originally, those classic 6 malts, and we've extended the family to include Kalila, because why wouldn't you, because it's delicious, and also Klein Leash if you can get it, and make them a little bit different. And we put a little, what I like to say, like fun cask finish on it. So for every different edition, for the Talisker it's a 10-year-old, for the Glenkinchie it'll be a 12-year-old, for this one it's a 16-year-old, but then we have finished it off in a fortified wine cask. All of these casks will be, that's what I'm trying to say, they are usually heavily charred with like an extra deep char on the ends to give it that real punch of life for the few months that they're in it. Time wise, we are probably talking 3 to 9 months at a time. There is no like it's done, but that is the sort of time period we're looking at. And for Lagavulin, we put it into PX casks, that sticky, sweety, chewy, delicious sherry that reminds me every time of Christmas.
No, it's a beautiful whiskey. And someone straight away, it was in there with the mention of PX casks, and it does totally change it compared to the first two. The Stephen Fisher said the distillers is so much richer, enhancing the peatiness, making the taste richer, keeping it smoother. It definitely is, and Daniel Oakes' the 2020 festival release is stunning. I suppose you do have different kind of, going back to the jazz one, not to take away from this because we'll focus on it again in a second. But the jazz one is when I was there in the distillery, there's a few open that you could try, and in the bar there, obviously not free samples or whatever. And it was amazing how different they were, and how Marmite some of them were. Some of them were like, oh, people were like in front of me were like, oh, I have to buy a bottle of this 2019. It's just amazing, and I was not fussed on it at all. So it is. They are, as we say, some of them can be duds, but also it obviously can be personal preference. James has said, I've noticed the Lagavulin tend to stay with their tried and true cask choices. Distiller's edition tends to always be PX. Any chance we'd ever see something truly funky like a port cask?
Oh God, stop! Wouldn't that be delicious? I always like to see fun casks and fun cask finishes. The answer is yes, they will exist somewhere within our lovely warehouses. When I was last in, oh God, I can't remember which distillery it was, I came across a red wine finish from that distillery, and I'd never seen one before. I know you could only get it from the distillery, and I possibly will never see it again, but we do play around with them. We just don't do it on the regular. If we're talking about something like port finish as a regular addition, it's probably unlikely, because we put our Cragganmore in port to give it that kind of like really rich tannic punch to it. Every time I talk about the Distillers edition and how the pairing of fortified wines, or whatever you'd like to call them, go well with the distillery, every time I'm like, well, of course they do, because that is what the blenders and that's what the distillery team's job is to match it extremely well. I would love to see a port on Lagavulin. A lot of times when it comes to it, though, it's that we make so much 16 that other little projects are put to the side, and then when they are available, they will become available. A lot of times, the blending team tell me that they have like almost like little fights about how good certain casks are. And for example, like the special release from like last year with the Klein Leash, they were like, God, that's really good. I'd kind of like to show that off. It's for this one project here, but actually, I think we should just take it. And then like some people try to overrule other people to kind of show it off for their various projects. And I think it's a bit of like a tug of power when they get to do those fun casks. Speaking of which, I have seen maybe had a little look at the lineup for the next special releases, and they all look like some very fun casks coming out.
Well, when you mentioned that we were talking before this tasting of my trip to Islay, I can't see it here, but I still have my driver's pack of some of those whiskies. When we did the warehouse tasting with Pinky, it was brilliant, but we did try a load of exotic casks. I can't remember now off the top of my head which ones they were, but I
They,
still
yeah,
have them here somewhere. But so definitely exist
they
out
do
there.
exist, yeah. And
And
more
someone
often,
mentioned, sorry.
I was going to say, more often than not, you will find them solely at the distillery.
Mhm.
You have to literally have that epic trek to get there, so that's your reward at the end, really.
Yeah, I mean, someone mentioned, was it a mezcal? Yeah, dance at the mezcal cask recently. I think one of the recent Jazz Fests one might have been a mezcal.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, it is possible to get Lagavulin in different casks. So there's also mentioned there that the Distillers Edition is sold out. It shouldn't be. I can see. I've checked it. It is. But I think there definitely is some in there. So if it's not, I can rectify that in the morning. I'm pretty sure. So when the email goes out for this, I'm pretty sure we can have some back in stock because they as far as I'm aware, I checked this morning and there should have been plenty there unless there's been a run on it in the meantime. Dana said the Feshaw 2021 was finished in port seasoned American oak casks. So there you go. Just get your hands on that. There was also Jordan says I'm getting married in September and I've bought a case for the evening. I absolutely love this bottling. The PX just rounds out the dram. So I mean I'll await the invitation, Jordan.
that's going to be a good night.
Yeah, Pete's in there as well saying need help drinking that question mark. I'd say a case. Maybe it should have gone for 2 cases.
I think you're right. Like it adds such an oomph to it. Every time I go to the 16-year-old, I think, wow, big and bold. And we say that Lagavulin, King of Islay, and you're like, yes, I see it. Then you come on to the Distillers Edition, you're like, wow, that blows that one out of the water. The peatiness of the smokiness is just enhanced. And I always have the idea of sherry and sweetness rounding everything off, but no, it just makes it like sing ever much louder. And I
Um,
just love
No,
that.
definitely. Jordan's laid down the gauntlet. He's dared us to show up on the 2nd of September. So we might see you there, Jordan. Danny's also posted a brilliant picture of an engraved Lagavulin. So that must have been a smashing Christmas present there, Danny. Leon says been saving my final dram, the 2016 Distillers Edition. Once it's gone, I mean, it's. I've realised now, having moved over from Ireland last January and bought a load of whiskey over with me from home, and I was looking at some of the bottles recently, and I was like, there was little bits left in, and I was like, oh, I've been saving that, and then you crack them open, and they do lose a bit. If they're, I mean, whiskey lasts forever, especially if the bottle's fairly full, but once it gets down towards the end, you are
Mm.
better off just drinking it because it will start to lose some of its complexity.
And
So
then the fondness is gone, and you're like, "Oh, God, I should have got it then." Now I know the thing. You want to hold on to it forever and ever. That delicious last drop of deliciousness.
it is.
Um, I You was talking about going peat digging with Pinky. He is kind of leaving or has already left the distillery. I don't know if he has at this moment in time. I couldn't.
He told us he was retiring, and then when I said it to someone in the pub afterwards, back in the town of Bowmore, they were like, "Sure, he's been saying that for years."
Yeah. Actually, I forgot to ask you about that, but the my only time going to Lagavulin was with my lovely colleague, and he had told me wonders, but most importantly, he was doing a beautiful Pinky impression, and I was just in love with his accent and the way he talked. And when we got there, I literally like grasped his arm, and I was like, "Oh my God, is that Pinky?" And he heard me, and he turned around, and he's like, and I can't do the accent, apologies, I'm not even going to try, but he's like, "That's Mr. MacArthur to you." And I was like, "Oh God, I'm sorry, Mr. MacArthur." He's like, "Nah, you can call me Pinky, don't worry." An absolute gem of a human being. That he's like ingrained in the walls of the distillery. I'll tell you that, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, for those listening who might not know, who don't know the context of this, so Pinky works in this. So it's Ian what's you say?
MacArthur.
MacArthur, that's it. Who's worked in distillery for donkey's years, and he does the warehouse tasting. If you book that when you visit, and he's highly entertaining. We had a great time with him. But there was a group of people with us who got 6 or 7 people from. I think it was Bulgaria, but they didn't speak a word of English, not even close to kind of like like if I was in France or Germany, I might try with the odd pigeon. There was nothing. So we got both a whiskey tasting and a miming session as Pinky tried to explain everything. It was quite entertaining. So he apologized to us afterwards that he wasn't able to be just more loose with his accent, because which is, you know, understandable with the language barrier. We were like, no, this was way more entertaining watching him dance around trying to,
Yeah, you
trying to
should have
describe
been
things
something.
with the language barrier. So yeah, it's definitely worth, if I mean maybe he's finished there as you say, Charlotte, but if you are in Islay, it's definitely worth taking a trip down to Lagavulin. It's a great visit. Definitely is. Not just saying that because you're on.
I don't know. No, I think I truly agree. I think it's always it's also being on Islay. It kind of brings things into focus more of like the setting of where I do mean it, so much fabulous whiskey is made. I mean, when you talk to people even at the distillery, they talk about other distilleries. They talk about them fondly. About they'll still drink them at home. It's not like a rivalry of anything like that. It's like, this is just what we all do and what we all drink and what we all love to do as well. And I kind of really appreciate that. Almost, it's like a community in such a lovely way, especially where Lagavulin is the line of distilleries along that part of the coast as well. You can't help but trip into another one, right?
Exactly. No, you're 100% right. I'm going to let you in a little secret here, Sharon. I've actually finished my Decimus edition, so I don't know if anyone at home out there coming along. If maybe we want to come on to the 12-year-old special edition.
That means that I am boring. I see. I'm just
No,
moving.
no, I didn't mean it that way. I have actually
Uh-huh.
saved it. It was actually the chats were the questions and the points were so fascinating. That was not a callback to the start of the.
Let's move on to our final drama of the evening. I kind of really enjoy this.
Graham and Emma have said that when we did the Pinky Warehouse tasting, there was two American ladies who thought they would be driving afterwards.
High thoughts. No, always taxis or a lovely little walk if you can manage it. Team, the next one we are drinking is cask strength. So just I know we're warmed up already, but I always like to warm people before we just shove our nozzles in it like I do. I always say there's a reason I wear glasses, and it's to stop me getting my face in too close.
Yeah. So this one is obviously, as you say, the big jump up. What is it? 57.
53?
Well, look, 57 according to my bottle, but maybe it's 53. I don't know.
Oh, sorry, 57.3. Sorry, that's what I meant.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a bit of a jump up, right? Yeah. For me, this is So for the last special releases, I was doing a lot of talk about the peated whiskey, and so I'm very familiar with this. And actually, I talk about the 16-year-old being a really beautiful homecoming. When I was doing all of these tastings, I drank a lot of this particular expression, and it's not that I don't love Lagavulin. It's not there in the back of my mind, but it made me fall in love with it again because I was tasting it so much, just finding so many different things every time I came to it. And I think that happens to me with the 16-year-old, but just because it is a slightly different way that we're showing off Lagavulin. For those of you that don't know, we've released special releases every year since 2001 with Lowly Wheataliska. And generally speaking, we'll pop out about 8, sometimes a bit less, sometimes a bit more, depending on which. And quite recently, we've been doing a lot of Lagavulin 12-year-olds, that kind of happy medium between the 8 and the 16, I guess, always at cask strength. And this one is a little bit different. We have it in refill bourbon, but also in virgin oak as well. I don't know, I sometimes wonder if I bear it in mind too much, and I'm thinking too much about the fact that it's new oak, and I'm wanting to get some of those more new oak flavors. But what makes this edition a little bit different is that we were very particular with the casks that we used for this one. And I'm sure, as you realize, when you see how barrels are doing, you test and you do liquid analysis and you see how everything's doing. And we decided, I say we, I wasn't part of the team, but they decided, the wonderful people in the know decided that they would do it purely based on data. And they pulled out the data of the barrels that had the highest phenolic content. the highest amount of peat, purely driven by data, and they blended those together and bottled those.
Oh, interesting.
It is. In this instance, when we talk about smokiest reserves, this is what we mean by it. I know sometimes language and bottles can be a bit smoke and mirrors, but in this case, this is what we're meaning.
So it's a whiskey for Nate Silver. That's interesting. There was, I mean, like you mentioned the kind of new oak flavors. I mean, I could definitely get it's a bit more tannic and a lot more dry on the finish. So I mean that was one of the first things that jumped out at me. I mean, Daniel said very smooth and sweet. A higher V doesn't overpower it at all. I would definitely agree. And James said this one definitely immediately hits them with barbecue sauce, which is an interesting one. Because I mean, I can see on some of the kind of, I don't know how to describe this. There's some elements I can see with barbecue sauce, but for me, barbecue sauce would be a lot more sweeter. It's not quite as sweet as some of the ones we've already tried. But I can definitely see where you're going with that one, James. Katrina says more Lagavulin should be cask strength. I will definitely agree. I think I know people in Irish whiskey anyway, they call them the cask strength crusaders. All these people who think everyone thinks should be cask strength. But it is something we hear a lot on here where people and I totally agree with the sentiment. Not knocking it here, that you taste some of these whiskies and you're like, God, if these are all cask strength, we'd all be very happy.
I agree. I love seeing things at cask strength because you just kind of see it as it I say as nature intended or something equally as flowery, but it's true. You're seeing it as it's come out the barrel more or less, and I love that sentiment. I also love the idea of bringing it down to whatever ABV you want it to be. Make your own whiskey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Get back the layers yourself. David said, been picking up the 12 throughout the call to try and pick up the nose of it. Seems to remind me a lot of pharmacy, something medicinal. I mean, definitely people get a lot of iodine from that Lagavulin, so that would make sense with some sweetness. Was looking forward to getting to it now, getting to taste it. Wow, that hit way spicier than I was expecting. A sharp, spicy like pepper, getting some citrus at the end like lime. Most enjoyable of the evening, best for last. So brilliant. I mean, we won't finish just yet, but if people want to get in kind of some questions now as we come a bit towards the end, and also let us know what your favorite was in terms of order of what we've tasted. Jordan said the 12 is more herbal, a lot of damp smoke and less sweet. He agrees with me, Jordan. It's a good way to win a bottle of whiskey, right? He said definitely drier than the rest and a bit more salty. I wish there was more cask strength. The flavors really come through, an amazing lingering finish. Wow, we're loving this one, says Graham and Emma. So this is brilliant. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on this, Charlotte. I'm going to dig out the old discount code for everyone so they can get purchasing.
No, please. I was going to say I totally agree with all of these wonderful tasting notes. The tongue does tingle, and I think it's super herbal. I know we talked about the 8-year-old having that bit of like mezcal spice to it, but this is I've drunk a lot of it, so I feel like I've gone inside out of it, but like almost like green bell peppers, like dried basil, herbal to the extreme, like a lot of that mezcal-y stuff that we were talking about. It's just a wonderful tingly dram, and I think I'm really pleased that we do get to try everything side by side or close enough, because compared to the distiller's edition, which had that sweeter juiciness to it almost, that almost more refined, like I say red winey finish, but those more red fruit notes, this is like night and day, and it's really nice to have that big, massive, bold comparison to it. Oh God, I absolutely adore it.
No, it's delicious. Although on the kind of people's preferences so far, it looks like a toss up between the 16 and the distillers. I mean, a few people picking this one.
That is more than
And one
fair.
person going with the 8-year-old. Daniel's going with the 8-year-old. Oh, sorry, he's not. He's going with 12. He's going with this 12-year-old. He said number one is the 12-year-old rather than the first whiskey we tried. So apologies. So yeah, I'd say probably 16 followed by distillers, then 12. So it's interesting. I thought
It's more
maybe more people go for the cask strength or the last one. I always think you can be biased towards the last whiskey you try.
I kind of agree. Sometimes I think the first one suffers as well because you're having to warm up as well.
Oh, exactly, 100%. Yeah. That's why I think it was Pinky in that warehouse tasting. Someone asked him what his favorite whiskey was, and he said, "Oh, whichever one you're buying me." So
He's a good date.
yeah.
He's a very smart man. No, I love that. I love that. Oh God. I really enjoy being able to show off the different sides to it. I know there aren't that many expressions of Lagavulin that comes out. We always go for the 16. But yeah, I really enjoy being able to show the 12-year-old anyway. I feel like I haven't talked about all the beautiful history. We've just been chatting about the actual whiskey, which is never a bad thing, but I hope I'm not doing anyone a disservice. That's all I'm
But if
saying.
anyone's got any questions about the history, now's the time to ask them. And the Ian said that these all 2022 editions. They're definitely the most recent bottlings that we have in stock. Yeah, and Billy has given his a good breakdown of his results of his opinions there, which is interesting in terms of that, which has reminded me. I think what we're going to do is we'll do a couple for these. So if you're not, if I might read through back over in case I'm biased, but I don't know if you agree, Charlotte, but my tasting note for the night has been that the peppercorn one from earlier on. I think it got a lot of people going in terms of relating to it. So if you want to, if you haven't already put your name or email in there, just DM me it as well. And there will be, I will read through again because we've got a couple of bottles of each of these to give away compared to previous ones. So I will read back over and pick another one when I'm under less pressure. But you have to now decide your favorite question of the night.
Oh, goodness. I am. Oh, goodness. Oh, okay. I think it's a bit about the peat digging. So I'm just looking back, and now I'm stalling for time by talking more. God, there's just so many good tasting notes going up in here. I think it must be genuinely. I really like hearing about people asking more about environmental impact. I know it's that kind of logistical, a little bit on the technical side, but hey, we should be asking distilleries about it. We should be holding people accountable for it. That is the stuff that I like hearing about.
So yeah, so if you were the person who asked that question, just DM me your email address and I can verify if you asked the question. So don't random person, because I can read the transcript of the chat afterwards, and we'll get a bottle sent out to you. So no, I think that's good. The sustainability one, I think that's a good place to go for that one. We have a couple more questions in there before we finish. Katrina has said, Charlotte, how long has Diageo had Lagavulin? Do you know what strategy has been chosen to maintain the consistency of flavour since they took it over? So there's a good question.
Good, very good question. So, how long has Diageo had Lagavulin? Crumbs. I don't know. I can't remember the exact date that it was put into. It would have been DCL's hands, but I would imagine it would be around the. No, it wouldn't have been around the 1920s. I think it would have been around 1930 point. When we talk about the history of the distillery, we talk about it as a whole anyway, because of it's part of the life of it. It's also really kind of difficult to talk about Diageo when it comes to DCL as well. Distillers Company Limited, if anybody doesn't know the acronym for it, just because of how things have twisted and changed and everything like that. When it comes to maintaining the consistency of the flavor, I would not know about the actual strategy about maintaining the consistency of flavor. What I do understand is that there are priorities given, and there are priorities to malts such as Lagavulin, because it is such an iconic one that probably wouldn't be given to other malts. Hence why we take a lot of the malt from Port Ellen and put it into Lagavulin. Hence why I know that they've upped how many runs they make, because we need more of the juice, because people seem to love it, which is fantastic. But I also know that some other distilleries have had not funds taken away, but priority and love taken away from them in order to kind of, I say, fill in the gaps as well. I wouldn't know about how to maintain the consistency though. I have a feeling that, well, Jordan, for example, who has taken over as a distillery manager, he's an Islander through and through. I think you don't go into that with the idea that you're going to abuse something so, well, part of our history, something that we love so much.
No, 100%. That's well put. Kirsty has said, would Diageo be interested in sponsoring a PhD student to investigate sustainability and the impact climate change might have on your whiskey?
I I love it. Kirsty, I would not know who is the first person to ask about it, but I'm more than certain that that is a very worthwhile endeavor. I say, if you would get in touch with Diageo, please do. Um, I wish there was like a www.diageo that I could recommend you to.
If you email it to me and the Kirsty at Luke at whiskeyshop.com, I'll forward it on to Charlotte and whoever else and see if see if we can get you. A dumb priest never got a parish, as they say. Like, you have to ask.
You always do. It's very true.
There you go. No, that's brilliant. So the discount code, I put it in the chat twice for anyone who's missed it. So WS16LKI is the code that'll get you 15% off all the whiskies we've tried tonight. I know it was mentioned that the Distillers Edition was showing up as not in stock. I will try and sort that tonight. So hopefully have that either an answer as to why or back in stock tomorrow. So yeah, Terry says the code says not valid. I will definitely look at that, Terry, and try and sort it. But you have to be logged into your W Cub account. Are you logged in, Terry? I can see you holding the screen up to the phone. The phone up to the screen. Are you logged in? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll double check that now once we finish the call, and we'll get that sorted for you. It was working for me before we started. Do you want to just message me there, Terry, which whiskey you're buying, and we'll just so I can see if it's an issue with that particular bottle as opposed to the code. Brilliant. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining. If there's anything we didn't get around to, please don't be afraid to email and reach out, and we can talk about it. After that, and we get it answered for you. Is there anything you wanted to say before we finish?
I was going to say, there seems to be people questioning the King of Islay. It is, I didn't get into it, unfortunately, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions on the sideline about it. But yeah, I think it's an interesting story about why it's the King of Islay and such like that. But we can get into it another time, I'm sure.
Marvelous. I thought you were just being provocative,
Oh, I promise not, never.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Charlotte, and we'll talk to you soon. And Terry, I'll look at that discount code straight away. So thanks very much, folks. And we will have another whiskey tasting going on sale hopefully next week. And then they'll be thick and fast after that. So keep an eye out if you enjoyed tonight. And we'll see you again. Thanks a million, Charlotte. We'll see you.